You can start.
Hi, good day, everybody. My name is Farid Essak. I'm normally based at the University of Johannesburg. And today we are doing this discussion with Dr. Marthie Momberg. Dr. Marthie Momberg is a long-standing friend of ours personally, as well as of Africa for Palestine, but more importantly, she has been for a number of years actively and been engaged in the Palestinian struggle for justice and in the international community's efforts to be in solidarity with the Palestinians. Africa for Palestine is a Johannesburg-based organization that, like a host of other organizations in South Africa, we stand and we act in solidarity with the Palestinians against injustice and occupation, particularly the attempts of the Israeli regime to make greater inroads into Africa. Our guest today is Dr. Marthie Momberg. She did her PhD and is currently a researcher at the University of Stellenbosch, which is one of the more beautiful parts of South Africa, and I dare say with a bit of a mixed history. Okay, like all South African universities, really. Marthie, thank you very much for being with us. Organizationally, Marthie is very active in Kairos, Kairos for Palestine. I don't know, many people with a religious connection would know what the word denotes. But in many ways, the original Kairos document was a church document that was adopted by a church declaration that was adopted by theologians during the apartheid era to challenge the cohabitation of apartheid and Dutch Reformed theology, the church and the apartheid state being in bed at the same time. So Marthie comes from that school of theology, and she is here today with us. Marthie, you have been to Palestine on more than one occasion. You have blogged about your visits to Palestine and so on. I don't want to religionize the conversation immediately, but you do come from an Afrikaner background. You do come from a very Christian background. And at the popular level, many Afrikaners, of course, also saw South Africa as die gelofte land, the promised land, you know. Christians from a completely different perspective, many right-wing Christians from a completely different perspective. I mean, it's actually quite bizarre, desiring the destruction of the Jewish people. They want Israel to become a Jewish state in order to hasten the coming of the Messiah who will destroy the Jews. And of course, sometimes unknowingly, but also very cynically, Israeli politicians and Zionists know this, but they're also pretty happy to get into bed with the very same Christians who are seeking their destruction in the long run, bizarre as this may sound. So how do you come to this question, Marthie, as a Christian and as an Afrikaner?
Yeah, thank you, Farid, and thank you for sketching the background so well. I don't come from the strand of Christianity that wants to get in bed with the Israelis for that reason, for a theological reason, in the literal sense of understanding the Bible on a very literal way, that all Christians, all Jews must go back, return to Israel for the second coming of Christ. I come from, that position is, as much as it boggles the mind, and I don't get it, just as you don't get it. I come from a position that's almost more dangerous, in the sense that this is what the Kairos 85 theology in South Africa in terms of apartheid described as church theology. That's a position where you don't take sides because you don't want to get involved, and you speak in terms of a conflict where there's actually an asymmetric relation between parties. From my perspective, I simply did not know about the injustices. I did not know that I was actually buying the Zionist narrative of an innocent Israel and threatening Palestinians wholesale. So my path was first to understand my complicity in maintaining apartheid in South Africa through my silence, because that is unfortunately what I did, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life. And then the shock after I realized this and how wrong it is, then about 11 years ago, I realized, but I'm actually doing the same thing again, but this time in terms of Israel and the Palestinians. And it was through ignorance. So when I realized that, I just couldn't walk away from the issue, and it was not just factual information. It was a very deep emotional experience, and then followed my whole path of actually monitoring human rights violations in Israel and Palestine for 3 months, and realizing there that I have to take a public stand, which was very difficult for me to do because I'm a private, introvert kind of person. But I knew that I had to do it. So I came back, changed my research focus, and here I am.
Marthie, much of your research tried to get into why South Africans have this kind of disproportionate interest in solidarity with the Palestinians. What are some of the kind of answers that you came up with?
Yeah, Farid, it has a lot to do with the fact that in South Africa, we made cosmetic changes in terms of apartheid. Apartheid is no longer legalized, but class apartheid, economic apartheid, and in fact, racial apartheid still exist, as we all know. And it is such a deeply ingrained part of a large part of the South African society, and it's not only Dutch Reformed people, it's white people, not even only white people, from all walks of life. And so the issue for me is not simply a political, a socio-political, even a religious issue. It's an existential, it's an emotional, it is a very, very deep thing that we have the capacity as human beings to see someone else as a second-class human being. And we don't acknowledge our position of superiority, and that we actually continue to colonize. I was in a discussion on Friday night with very good friends, hugely intelligent, in academic positions, not in theology, in a different field. And I mean, I was just shocked out of my shoes about the deep-seated white superiority in the circle of my own friends. So it's from that angle, and I think that we as a society cannot move on if we don't face our own shortcomings and heal, acknowledge it. And the thing is, I think people are so scared to say we were wrong or I am wrong. But it frees you up. Yeah, I don't think I can make a change, but I feel that I have to continue to search for ways to at least express what I think, and that's what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. And why? I mean, I don't know, but often I get the impression that South Africans particularly feel strongly about the Palestinian cause, certainly more than many of the rest of the continent. Why do you think this is the case, Marthie?
Yeah, I think we must connect it to our South Africans' identification with whiteness, perhaps, and with the Western society. Because you see the same thing in the United States, in Europe, Germany particularly, the Netherlands especially. But now I may be wrong in saying this, because you also see it in South Korea. You also see it in Japan. You also see it in South America, Latin America. But I think the dynamics in South Africa has to do with perceptions of superiority. And that it ties to our colonial history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And perhaps, I mean, many of us, I think, who have been there, we just recognize the affinities between apartheid South Africa and apartheid Israel in such a stark way.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there are always nuances, and there are always differences, and there are different ways of describing white supremacy in different kinds of contexts. But it is inevitable that we actually recognize it as such. Now, one of the challenges, Marthie, that we face in the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, not in South Africa, but internationally, particularly in Europe, is that there is a kind of refusal to acknowledge the narratives of other people. So while in Germany, the Germans may have been part of a movement to boycott apartheid South Africa. But when it comes to boycotting South Africa, they refuse to recognize the South African narrative, where international solidarity and sanctions against the apartheid regime was one of the major pillars that led to the formal end of apartheid. They refuse to recognize this and only recognize their own narrative of Nazism, where we don't buy from the Jews. And then they impose that narrative on the contemporary boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement in South Africa. What do you think this says? This refusal to recognize an alternative global South narrative where sanctions worked. The refusal to recognize this, what do you think this says about white supremacy?
Yes, I spent quite a few months in Germany over the years, and I asked myself that question. And the only conclusion, I don't know if I'm right, but the only conclusion that I come to, and obviously here also we spent a lot of time with German theologians and their horrifying refusal to acknowledge it, as you say, that during the Nazi period, or during the much longer period of Jewish persecution that actually started at the end of the 15th century, in Germany, it was all about the self being better than the other. And I think that if they cannot see that there is another issue in the world that is also important, then it is still about the self and never about the other. I think they are so locked into seeing the world through their eyes. Now, their vision has expanded slightly to know that they should not discriminate against Jews. But they don't see how they discriminate against others. And I have a very practical example. I studied for a few months in Berlin, and I stayed with young students in a not a hostel, but in a home. I studied for a few months in Berlin. Can you hear me? Because something odd happened now. Okay. And one of the students on my floor, she was engaged with someone who was Roman Catholic, but also studied theology like she did. And when she went for, there was a kind of a discussion that had to allow her into the Landeskirche in Germany. They said to her, if as long as you are married to a Roman Catholic, you cannot become a priest or a minister in the Landeskirche. If he was Jewish, it would have been fine, but not if he's Roman Catholic. And that made the penny drop for me, that they know, because of so much pressure of the world, that it's wrong to discriminate against Jews. But they continue to discriminate. So, like we did not undergo true healing, sufficient true healing in South Africa, the Germans also didn't. And this is what concerns me, is the psyche of a collective. The collective in Israel, the collective in Germany, the collective in South Africa, the collective in the United States, almost everywhere. Yeah.
And so, until in some ways, for as long as the horde thinks of anti-Zionism, anti-Israeli occupation as synonymous with anti-Jewishness, they also in some ways find refuge in that being a part of the horde. And at the same time, because they are a collective, there is no accountability for the ongoing oppression against the Palestinians, for the arms industry that their taxes pay or that they profit from, I'm talking about in the global north, that sustains and weaponizes that occupation.
Yes, and what is so concerning is that people who are supposed to be intellectuals and leaders in society, like Chief Justice Mogoeng, for instance, who knows international law, they hold those opinions, which says to me, this has nothing to do with intellect or even knowledge for many. It has to do with a way of looking at life, and I don't understand it. But you know, the horror of the situation can be totally overwhelming. And so I say to myself, I cannot help those people. I cannot move them. But there are many people who, like me, who simply did not know. and who would like to know. And I have seen shifts in churches, amongst Christians, amongst others through the years. And so whenever I want to get so overwhelmed with the fact that people don't get it, I know that there are people who get it, and that momentum is building.
Can you give us an overview, Marthie, of the more established churches' positions in South Africa, and what can be done to ensure that those positions reach down to the ordinary congregational level? Because very often, I mean, synods make proclamations, you know, and then what happens afterwards, you know, when does it get to an ordinary congregant, if it does ever at all? So can you just give us an overview of what the church's position is in South Africa, and what more could be done to get this to go down to a congregant level?
Yeah, you are so right in summarizing this issue. Well, the first church to, the first synod decision that included support for BDS came from the United Congregational Church, which was incidentally also the first church to speak up officially against apartheid. But that happened in 2015. So the Kairos call and the Palestinians call for BDS came in 2005, and then the Kairos Palestine call came 4 years later in 2009. But in South Africa in 2015, we had the first church, and since then, quite a number of churches took very, very progressive decisions. They include the Uniting Reformed Church, or the VGK, as we say in Afrikaans, the Methodist Church, the Anglicans of Southern Africa, the African Independent Churches, and who else? But not yet the Dutch Reformed Church, which is my church. But they have started a task team jointly with the Uniting Reformed Church to look at the issue. So, but you are quite right that often church leaders work through the issues and make a decision, but it's not representing what what members of the churches think. So the solution to that is really to have sessions in which we sensitize and train and educate. And each time through the years, when I've spoken to church leaders at the, say, for instance, the South African Council of Churches or on other platforms, the church leaders say, we get it, but we are not equipped sufficiently to go back to our congregation members and explain the matter to them. Because we all know there's a lot of knowledge involved in this issue. And they say, but they will pose this argument and that argument, and I can't answer. So for years now, I have tried with my Jewish colleague, Mark Braverman, and others to do workshops. We have done some, and we offered seminars, but we have no funding. So it's really, really, really a challenge to do so. So we continue on this road, and this year I have new plans for workshops, but it's really starting very small and then it goes out. I wish I mean, there are electronic platforms, increasingly so. We will make use of it, but it does take time. If you know of a different solution, tell me, because I don't know. Churches themselves must accept responsibility to do the discernment. That's actually, for instance, the decision the resolution that the World Communion of Reformed Churches came to in 2017. That is what the Cry for Hope call from the broader movement of Christians in the world asked churches last year. But they don't. They don't do that. Yeah.
And you know, one of the interesting things in South African Judaism is that it's a largely educated community with a fairly good amount of intellectual and theological sophistication, both amongst the Orthodox Jews and amongst the Reformed and progressive communities. And yet, none of those elements or theologians or rabbis or thinkers ever think of say, engaging theologically with Christians. And so, unlike in many other parts of the world where you have a thing called, say, like interfaith dialogue, as you know, often at a grassroots level, local churches, local mosques, local synagogues, and so on. In South Africa, Judaism or Jewry is remarkably absent from those things, from these kind of fora, with the exception of occasionally when it's a symbolic thing, you know, the chief rabbi of the Orthodox Jews, I dare say, although he keeps on being called the chief rabbi, he's the chief rabbi of the Orthodox Jews. He puts in an appearance, okay? But the only Christians that they are interested in, and I'm not sure if it is for dialogue or not. I don't even think it is for dialogue. It is purely for instrumentalization. I mean, it's like, you know, when there's a TV debate and we need an side, so we scurry around to find a black Christian, conservative Christian who's more comfortable in South's, in Trump's, the South of the United States of America. So we scurry around for such a Christian, or we scurry around for a, what is the head of the African Christian Democratic Party?
Kenneth Meshu.
Kenneth Meshu. Or we scurry around for a Kenneth Meshu, okay? But there is no actual theological dialogue between them and that crowd, possibly because they know that the theology of that crowd has this end times scenario that means the end of the Jews. So, but the Christians that they are not in conversation with, but in alliance with, are the Christians who, and so there's just no dialogue. But at the same time, I mean, especially under the previous ambassador, Arthur Lenk, but it continues now, there are very energetic moves on the part of the South African Zionist community to engage those, the biblicist or the more right-wing pro-Zionist Christians. And so in some ways, what one sees here is a very sad instrumentalization of a sector of Christianity for narrow political purposes. And I don't know, but if I were a Christian, I would really feel deeply insulted by the way that they see no value whatsoever in my theology, but there is value in my blackness. There is value in my blackness. There's value in my Christianity as a way of just kind of adding another layer to the defense of apartheid Israel. What do you? That's a bit of a long comment on my part, but we're engaging.
Yeah. Two comments. I'm aware of the Dutch Reformed Church has actually quite close connections with with Jews, the previous person who's no longer involved in that, managing that relation, is in my view really a liberal Zionist. You know how Christians think. Christians think that God will love us a little bit more if we love the Jews. That is what it boils down to. And that's why they will tolerate anything. I've seen it with some church leaders that I worked with, that they would see the Palestinian issue, the penny will drop, but there's not enough power in it. There's more power, there's more prestige, there's more, we please God more if we are in alliances with Jews. But now, what I don't get is that, and I must say, maybe I come from the same place, that we think all Jews are the same. I mean, that was the thing that shocked me, that not all Jews support the state of Israel. Once I understood that, I could start drawing away the curtains. But now when I explain to someone, but not all Jews are the same, and can I please introduce you to Heidi Grunebaum or whoever in South Africa, for instance, in the South African context, they refuse. I don't understand that. Why would one, if you are so loyal to the Jews, and this is the Holocaust theology that we maintain, why then do you want to speak to some Jews and not to others? And my answer to that, my guess is that Jews in leadership positions brings me closer to God, and it's an issue of power. And that nauseates me, but I think that's how I read the situation.
So it's not even, look, let me produce for you a progressive anti-Zionist Jewish rabbi. No, because that rabbi is not in a position of power.
Exactly.
And so I don't care. I mean, no, he's not.
Exactly.
He's not a real Jew.
He's a dissident. He's a dissident, and he is like a Beyers Naudé was.
Yes.
We don't associate with him. So that's why I'm saying nothing has changed. It's a repetition of this same politics, the power politics that we've seen under apartheid.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, and you know, Martie, as we were talking and we were commenting, or I was starting the comment on South African Jewry and how the vast majority of the Jewish community, you know, the kind of dialogue that they're interested in, and the kind of dialogue that they're not interested in with particular Christians. I was very conscious of my language. I was very, very aware that I need to watch my language. I mean, despite my, I think, 40-year record as speaking against anti-Semitism and calling anti-Semitism out wherever I find it, particularly in the Muslim community, if you make one mistake, then it's over. It's, you know, it's, but the one funny thing, Martie, is somebody asked me a while ago, so in the South African struggle for liberation, what was the word that you used for white people who supported, and what was the word that we used in struggle circles for white people who didn't support apartheid? And the fascinating thing is, we made a distinction, and our distinction was serious. Beyers Naudé was Oom Bey. He was Uncle Bey to Frank Chikane, to Smangalisho Mkachwa, to Farid Esak, to Ellen Busak. He was Oom Bey, Uncle Bey. Okay. And our white comrades and our white elders, they would sit in our gatherings, they would sit on the stage as we condemned the whites, as we sang songs, saying the Boers are dogs, and they sang along. Not once did we have to face the question of, but Oom Bey is white, Helen Joseph is white, Ankie Krog is white. Not once did, because it was understood, you know. And today it is fascinating how a noble cause, the cause against anti-Semitism, how it is being weaponized against the oppressed.
Yes. You know, when I did my research, I interviewed a number of activists from South Africa, but also from Israel. So the ones from Israel were obviously all Jews, but some of the South Africans were also Jews. So of the 21 people whom I interviewed, many of them were Jewish. And now I lost what I wanted to say, and I wanted to comment directly on something that you said. Yeah, they all spoke about the abuse of the memory of the Holocaust, and that they do not want to allow it. And it's interesting that Israel itself has started to weaponize that memory only later, not from the beginning.
After 67.
Exactly. Which is I think the West also always felt guilty, and that's why that whole British mess occurred in 1917 and what followed thereafter. And that's also why America became the mediator, but unsuccessfully so, of course, not impartial. But it is, the Holocaust is being weaponized, and the lessons that when we say never again, it's never again for everybody. That was such a consistent message that came out from all these activists that I interviewed. So you know, I'm interested in what can make things better. Why do people actually speak up in public? And it's an issue of integrity, that they cannot live with double standards. So not all of these people whom I interviewed, for example, were sensitized to the issue from the day they were born. Some of them were staunch Zionists. There were also Muslims and Christians whom I interviewed who thought it was a conflict or a religious issue or a whatever and did not know. But it is, once they understand the lies, this whole web of lies around Israel, they cannot live with those double standards, and therefore they have to speak up. It was a very, very key trend that came through. And it seems to me, watching TV, as most of us did last year, we watched a lot of TV, that is an issue in the world. The issue of integrity. Some people, leaders included, are very comfortable with lying, and others are happy to follow them. I don't get it. I understand that's the case, but then there are people who are not like that, and we must work together. Doesn't matter whether we're Christian or Muslim or Jewish or not from any faith or Hindu or whatever. There are enough of us, and I would like to hope that most of us are like that, and we have to work together.
Martie, I think we can leave it on that hopeful note. It was wonderful chatting to you, and it's just wonderful to have you as a part of this larger movement. With our hiccups sometimes and our disagreements sometimes, and pulling off bigger things at other times. But for better or for worse, I think, we can assure the Palestinian people that as part of our larger progressive internationalism, that we do support them in their struggle against occupation and for justice. And of course, like in South Africa, Martie, that also meant the liberation of white people. Whether all of them grasp the moment and some of them are still holding on, terrified of the new South Africa, that's not the point. Our struggle for liberation afforded them an opportunity to be liberated. And this is the case for all Palestinians, the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims. Our struggle against the politicization of the crass militarization and politicization of Judaism, the reduction of God to a mascot for a little nation carved out by our human boundaries and so on. God is a flag cheerer for ethnic and national chauvinism and so on. The collapse of all of this will mean freedom for all the victims, including the Jews in this, Martie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I may say just one last thing.
Yes, of course.
If there is, and I really speak from someone who supported apartheid in my country through my silence and my lack of involvement and through my fear. If there's anyone listening today who have doubts and is too scared to step forward, I would really like to encourage you to step forward, because as you say, Farid, it frees one. And yes, one leaves one group of people behind, but there's a whole wonderful other group of people who embrace you. And as a white South African, I can say that my Kairos colleagues, all of them from the struggle years, most of them Black, all of you in the wider movement, who are Muslims, who are Jews, who are something else, embraced me. And it's such an honor and a privilege to learn from you and to be part of this movement. And I think the Palestinians mean more to me than I can ever dream to mean to them.
Baie dankie, Martie. I'm deeply grateful for you. Verskriklik dankbaar. Geniet die res van die dag, hoor. Enjoy the rest of your day, Martie. Tot
Thank you, Farid. Take care.
Met plesier. Bye-bye.
Bye.